Today we're talking about the TTArtisan 27mm F2.8, a small versatile lens that can do everything and anything with almost no defects. Almost. TTArtisan was kind enough to send me the TTArtisan 27mm F2.8 for review, and today we have mounted the lens on the Fuji X-T5. The day starts rainy and gloomy, and my goal is to get one portfolio-worthy shot while testing the lens. For this first one I found a scene with emotional meaning and I wanted to deliver this in my photo. I framed the wet bench with the flowers pointing towards the misty park, which I blurred out by using an aperture of f2.8 and by focusing as close to me as I could. Then I quickly reached the scene that came close to be one of the top shots of the day. I used the path as a nice leading line, the trees in the background as a natural frame in which I framed a man with a coat and a hat cycling towards me. A classic scene. You can't go wrong with a scene like this, however I can't give it a place among the top shots because it was too easy. This lens is made with almost every manufacturer in mind except a few. So you can buy it for Sony, for Nikon and of course for Fuji cameras. I have personally used it on my Fuji X-T5. The 27mm focal length on a cropped sensor is equivalent to a 40mm focal length on a full frame camera, and for me this focal length has quickly become one of my favorite focal lengths to shoot with. Okay, this one is probably scratching the top of the shots today. Maybe not quite, but it is very close. Let me know what you think down in the comments. So, we have a man with a red thin jacket wearing a tie and a hat. Around him beautiful soft colors and contrast, while below him the sidewalk reflects everything to give the shot this something more. Then I found this really cool spot that combined reflections, things I could use for framing and nice shadows. So I shot through those two windows while someone holding a yellow umbrella was passing in the left frame and three people were framed nicely in the right frame. Also some reflections added some elements of interest in the foreground. The lens is made of a combination of metal and plastic, and one of its most important features is that it is ultra lightweight. It only weighs about 90 grams and it's perfect as an everyday carry lens. Imagine that I was using the Yonyu 50mm f1.2 for a couple of weeks and then suddenly I switched to the TTArtisan and I really felt that the Fuji X-T5 was a street photography camera all over again. I found this big lamp inside this closed restaurant that was distorting everyone passing behind it. I waited for someone interesting to pass and in the end I got a bike. What do you think? Is it actually the best shot? I needed to shake off the excitement from this previous photo and I noticed this lady with this jacket that was popping out from the otherwise monotonous scene. I used a couple of bikes as a foreground frame and took this shot. Then back to reflections again. I photographed the reflection of this serious man from one side and only a small part of this lady's face on the right side, giving layers and directionality to the frame that reach from the left to the right. On top of the lens you can find this narrow ring that you can use to adjust your aperture, but you can do so from only two sides of the ring that extend outwards to create these two flaps. Now I do have a problem with it, but we will discuss it a little bit later in the video. The aperture ranges from f2.8 to f16 and the aperture stops are clicky, so you can feel when you reach one stop, which is something that I generally like on the lenses. In the front of the lens you can find another ring that you can use to adjust your focus whenever you're shooting in manual focusing, that it's nice and smooth. This next frame is one I love a lot. My initial thought was to photograph Trinity College in the background and that signpost on the left while framing someone in between them. And then this girl started moving in front of my camera in circular motion, which I found really interesting. So I wanted to capture her motion in this image. Of course, then I gave some love to this impressive building, which I have actually never photographed properly before. A few steps further down the road, I noticed a lady wearing a headscarf. She was looking a little unsure and reserved. And I wanted to capture exactly this because I found it quite genuine and honest. Back to reflections that, as you can see, they have been the point of focus for this video. Here I wanted to create layers by framing the girl sitting in the restaurant in the front, then another person inside, and then the reflections of a mom and her daughter in the background, and of course the car. So in total the photo reads in a Z shape. This lens doesn't feature weather sealing, however I did use it shooting in light rain and it performed fine. However, of course, I wouldn't recommend you do the same. Also, I should mention that this lens doesn't have optical image stabilization. So a camera like the Fuji X-T5 or something like that has optical image stabilization might be necessary for shooting with this lens, especially because it doesn't open very wide because its max aperture is f2.8. Okay, the build is decent and fun, but what about the image quality, which is, I guess, the most important aspect for a lens? So I have been working on this dual multi-exposure idea in which I'm taking the red or green little people on traffic lights and putting them in the most surrealistic situations. For example, here I first took a long exposure of a passing car while moving the camera. Then I went to the traffic light and framed the red person inside the light strip to get this cool effect. As I have experienced before with TTArtisan lenses, I can say that the sharpness on this lens is decent. At f2.8, images are a little softer, both in the middle and on the sides of the images. However, the sharpness improves as you stop down towards f5.6. Another thing I observed with this lens is that you tend to get some swirly effect when you're shooting very close to your subject and wide open at f2.8. I like the bokeh on this lens. I found the bokeh to be nice and smooth, especially because this lens is a wide lens, relatively wide lens, 40mm, and f2.8 doesn't open up so wide, so you wouldn't expect to have a very prominent bokeh. However, in certain cases, if you are too close to your subject, you can get nice bokeh, which does add to this cinematic look of the photo. So overall, the image quality on this lens, again, thinking where this lens is coming from, what is the background of the lens, I would say it's decent. It gets the job done, and it's a fun lens to shoot with. Of course, it is not an optically perfect lens. It does have its defects. It does have certain quirks, one of which is quite famous and it's quite prominent, but we're going to talk about it in just a little bit when we will focus in the defects of the lens. This one is one of the few attempts of TTArtisan to incorporate autofocus in their lenses, so I was quite curious to test the autofocus and see how it performs on this lens. The autofocus on this lens is on par with other Fuji lenses, in my opinion. It's not the best autofocus I've ever used, but it's not the worst either. It sits somewhere in between. I didn't miss focus in many cases. I only missed focus when I had to shoot dynamic movement, subjects that would move quickly through my frame. Yeah, there it didn't perform perfectly, and these are kind of scenes that you often get out in the streets. However, I would say I was getting about 50% of the photos in focus. Of course, for that we shouldn't blame only the lens, because the Fuji X-T5 doesn't have one of the best autofocus performances out in the market, so probably it's a combination between the lens and the camera. Regardless, the lens is very silent. It doesn't make any motor noises when it focuses, so I would say you can definitely use it if you want to shoot video with it. So overall, the autofocus, I would say it gets the job done. So here is the moment that you've been waiting for. What's the catch? where is the problem with this lens? One of the main issues I had, which kind of annoyed me to be honest, was the conformation of the aperture ring. I really didn't like the two flaps that you had to use to adjust your aperture, because if you don't look at your lens physically or you don't have the two flaps right on your hands because you adjusted your focus or something like that, then it will be hard to find them again. Is this a deal breaker? I don't think it is a deal breaker, however, it does require some getting used to. The second downside of this lens, it comes from the image quality. I'm talking of course about the famous vignetting issue with this lens, which can be quite prominent. You can observe it specifically in certain cases, especially when you have very bright backgrounds because you have high contrast, especially on the edges. Otherwise, when you're shooting darker backgrounds, it tends to get hidden in your scene and you don't see it so much. However, you can mitigate for that, you can fix it in post-production easily in Lightroom if you're using profile corrections. Or you can choose to keep it in your photos because it is part of the character of the lens. You know that you're using this lens to get this feature, and in some cases it is nice to have that. The third and last downside, it comes from the range of the aperture, that it can go only down to f2.8, which especially on a cropped sensor camera, it doesn't let you get too much light into your sensor, so you might have some trouble shooting in low light conditions. It's not the end of the world, especially if you're not shooting in low light conditions so much, but it is something that you need to keep in mind if you are thinking of getting this lens. Compared to other lenses that I have used before, like the Fuji 35mm f1.4 or the Fuji 50mm f2, I would say that the TTArtisan is on par in terms of image quality. Yeah, it might be lagging behind a little bit from the Fuji 50mm f2, however, it is quite close with the Fuji 35mm, and it's probably better than the Fuji 17mm f2.8. Again, we're talking about different focal lengths, but I just want to give you a feel on what you get compared to some common street photography lenses from Fujifilm. So from me, because I like keeping an open mind and I like thinking the wallet of people, I would say that the TTArtisan comes recommended. I think you will enjoy it, especially if you're just starting out, you haven't used many lenses. This one will give you both the value and it won't break the bank. I had noticed this spot for a while and just now managed to go and shoot it. I love the lights which I used as leading lines, and of course the billboard that has a vintage vibe. In one case I framed a biker in front of it, and in another two girls, one of which had shiny blonde hair and cool writing at the back of her shirt. I think I prefer the second one, but which one do you prefer? Of course, I couldn't resist and take some photos of this phone box as well. And then this happened. The perfect light for framing, and the perfect subject happened to pass right through it and create a perfect silhouette and a perfect shadow. A girl holding an umbrella with her dog out for their night walk. What do you think? Is this a portfolio worthy shot? So who should get this lens? I think this lens is super versatile. I mean, it's this focal length that can be used for absolutely anything. You can use it for street photography, of course, as I have done. You can also use it for landscape photography. It might not be the widest, but you can still use it for some a little tighter frames. You can use it for architecture photography, definitely. You can use it for real estate photography with the caveat that you don't have this very wide aperture, so you can get, as we said, a lot of light into your sensor, so you might want to combine it with some additional lights as well. You can also use it for portrait photography, especially if you want to get more environmental portraits that include more of your subject's environment in the portrait to get more of a story into your portrait. That was all for today, guys. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time, I will see you on the streets. Bye bye.